Welcome back to the Jaco Report. What if they had a state legislature and nobody noticed? Media budget cuts mean places like Jeff City no longer get the coverage they once did, and meanwhile, state lawmakers are doing all kinds of things that will affect you, some important and some, well, bizarre. You'd figure a statewide vote outlawing puppy mills in Missouri would be fairly straightforward, but apparently not to some conservative outstate lawmakers. They want to repeal the puppy mill ban, calling it a violation of private property rights. They also say voters didn't realize what they were voting on. They're also planning to try and get rid of the Missouri state income tax and replace it with a higher sales tax, a tax plan that could hit lower income people the hardest. They've also planned to go after organized labor by making Missouri a right-to-work state. That would mean new hires at union shops would not have to join unions, effectively breaking the unions in those shops. Supporters call it economic development. Opponents call it ideological. Speaking of jobs, we can expect more cuts in budgets, ranging from schools to police, as the state budget is cut even more. Coming up, a look at what the hired help in Jeff City will be up to this session. Joining us now to talk about all that is Brian Hook. Brian is a veteran journalist. He's with MissouriWatchdog.org, a nonprofit website devoted to coverage of state government. Brian, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
What is Missouri Watchdog and why was it necessary?
Our purpose is to cover local, state, and federal government here in Missouri. And it is, like you mentioned, an area that has a lot of politics, policy, and things of that nature aren't as covered as much in the media as they might have used to been, and a lot of it has to do with budget cuts, and there's not as many people out there doing the reporting because...
Yeah, and I noticed Missouri Watchdog, you've got the stlouisbeacon.org, ProPublica.org, you've got a lot of foundation-supported nonprofit journalism websites who are sort of stepping into that breach, and I assume that's the role you guys are filling in state and local governments here.
That is one of the objectives, and another of the objective is also to help out with media who have had to make cutbacks, and so therefore they can come and help work with us as a resource.
Okay, now, one of your specialties is the Missouri state budget. Now, we've heard tales about our neighbor across the river in Illinois being probably the poster child for bad fiscal times in state governments. How bad does it look in Missouri, and where might the budget axe swing this time?
Comparing it to Illinois, Missouri looks great.
Well, that's some good news, isn't it?
The governor will go around and say things like, Missouri is one of only 7 states that has a triple rating by all 3 bond rating agencies. But there are some problems. I mean, the budget director says that we're facing, for fiscal 2012, which starts next July, that we're facing a $500 million shortfall. And that's one of the areas that they'll be looking at.
And Missouri, like most states, operates within a balanced budget framework. They have to balance the budget.
Exactly.
So that's $500 million. Where's that going to come out of? In the past, it's come out of things like education, medical care. Where are some of the likely suspects where the cuts might be made this time? Or does anyone know?
I think everyone has their own plans of where they want it to go. But we've heard that the governor's already given warning to education. They've been looking for that area. But the budget director, in one of her notes to all department heads, was, we're looking for reductions and cuts across the board. And she told me on the phone that everyone is going to have to look for ways to cut.
So we might end up with fewer teachers, we might end up with fewer roads being repaired, we could conceivably end up with fewer law enforcement officers. In other words, a trickle-down effect from the state budget being in these kind of constraints.
That is true. Like you mentioned with the roads in MoDOT, they're not going to be doing as many projects. They say that they're going to be able to maintain what we have, basically stay where we are. They're not going to be building anything new, big and pretty.
No, it's not like Missouri's been on this drunken spending spree. It's because tax revenues have fallen off because of the recession, that not nearly as much tax revenue is coming in as it was before. So are the powers that be in Jefferson City thinking that this may be on the uptick at some point and state revenues may increase, or are they looking at this as sort of a permanent state of cutbacks?
The consensus revenue estimate for fiscal 12 is, I believe, a 4% increase. It is starting to turn around. If you look at the monthlies that come in, there is more money coming in each month. But one thing I think that is important to look at is they will always refer back to, well, our tax revenues haven't been this low since 2008. But if you go back and you look at the spending side, spending has continued to increase since 2005. It was increasing before that. It has, even when it's gone down, spending has increased. A lot of that money did come in from the federal government as well.
People have worried about us falling off a cliff sort of economically again, in that the states are going to be laying off a lot of people, states around the country, and resulting in a lot more unemployment and that sort of thing, and saying that the fiscal constraints that the states are under could push us back into another economic hole. Is there any concern about that in Jefferson City? That there's a rolling effect to all of these cutbacks and the layoffs, that this could make things worse again, because a lot of people are going to end up losing their jobs probably?
Some people will definitely make that argument. They make the argument that you employ the more state workers, the state workers add to the tax revenue adds to the thing. And it's a classic Keynesian approach. The more spending you do to boost the economy, then the Republicans will come back and say, well, no, if we cut taxes for business or just for people in general, more of your supply siders will say that this will boost the economy. So I mean, it depends on who you ask. I think with Republicans in control, it'll be more looking at
supply siders.
Yeah, exactly.
Carrying the day. There's some other things that are going on in Jeff City that cause a lot of people to scratch their heads. We had talked about jobs. In the name of economic development, the Speaker Pro Tem of the Senate is a strong supporter of making Missouri a right-to-work state. That is, if you work in a union shop, you don't have to join the unions say that's nothing but union busting, and it has nothing to do with creating jobs, but it has everything to do with ideology. I mean, do you think that the right-to-work bill can be sold as an economic incentive, or is it just going to appear to people to be, Republicans going after organized labor?
I think labor will view it that way, definitely. The Republicans will argue that it does help to make it a right-to-work state. But what I found most interesting was the Missouri Chamber of Commerce came out with their recommendations a couple of days ago. Right-to-work wasn't in there.
So that even the business leaders in the state don't think it's much of an issue.
They came together and they said their coalition, that part wasn't in there. So whether he's pushing this alone or there are a lot of people who are coming to back him will wait to be seen. I think there are even some Republicans, especially in the more of the metropolitan areas, that aren't really wanting to touch the right to work issue.
Okay, on another matter, there's been a push, especially by Rex Singfield, the libertarian activist from here in St. Louis, to get rid of Missouri's income tax, replace it with maybe a larger sales tax statewide. Has anything like that seemed to have traction coming up in Jeff City, that they want to take a look at getting rid of the state income tax in the name of economic development?
I think that there will be quite a bit of push it depends on the committees and who will bring it up, but I think there will be a push for that. Whether it happens, again, that's hard to tell.
One of the other things, and this doesn't have anything to do with economic development, of course, there was a statewide vote about outlawing puppy mills, and now there are several outstate legislators who want to change that. I'm just wondering legally what the basis is for taking a vote of the people and then the lawmakers saying, oh, they really didn't quite understand what they were voting on, let's change this. I mean, is that legal? Can they do that?
Since that one was a statute, that they can change it?
No, rather than a constitutional amendment.
Exactly. Why they would want to? I think a lot of that, and I was surprised personally to see it, who's against puppies was the thinking that I thought. But a lot of this comes from more of the rural area, and there's a huge urban-rural divide. That's more not along party, that's whether you come from outstate or in Kansas City or here in St. Louis. And a lot of people who are backing the farmers, that they think to themselves, well, if they have this regulation, what's next? It's sort of the slippery slope. And there was quite a bit of groundswell against it. I was surprised to see people
saying that if you somehow regulate puppy mills, you're going to control my ability to raise cattle?
That's exactly the argument. Yes.
Interesting times. Brian Hook from MissouriWatchdog.org. Brian, thank you very much for coming in. It's been a real pleasure. When we return, new federal proposals will go after big carbon polluters, and one of the biggest in the country is our own Ameren. How those rules might affect the air, they might cut carbon emissions, and they will definitely cost you more on your electric bill. The Jaco Report, we'll be right back.